Welcome to today's Fireside Chat. This is MustardHub Voices behind the build. And here I talk with people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes, and our guest today is Summer Rogers. Summer is the founder of the Product Canopy, a boutique consulting firm that helps B2B SaaS and HR tech companies build scalable product foundations. A seasoned product leader and former VP at Cornerstone OnDemand, Summer specializes in connecting strategy, story, and execution, guiding early and growth stage teams from vision to velocity. Through her structured frameworks and fractional CPO engagements, she helps founders and teams align product, go to market, and leadership practices for sustainable growth. And her philosophy is simple: great products, like great teams, thrive when people see both the forest and the trees. Welcome to Behind the Build, Summer. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Curtis.
I really like that, seeing both the forest and the trees. I think that I'm probably going to steal that from you, but I promise to give you credit. So let's set the stage here. When you're not trash talking with your family members on the pickleball court, or shuffling around the kids to soccer. Tell me more about the Product Canopy. What is it? What's the origin story? I want to start there and then kind of get into what brought you there. So tell me more about the Product Canopy.
Yeah. Oh gosh, the origin story has a few contributing factors that I think a lot of people can relate to as they move through the evolution of their career. So, how far back do you want to go? You want to know the why the Product Canopy exists?
Yeah, I kind of do.
All right. So I've been in the world of HR technology and in the function of product management for, gosh, it's approaching 20 years. I know, hard to believe, right?
Yeah, well, I simply do not think that that's possible, but go ahead.
Thank you. So, about 20 years ago, I was a bright-eyed 25-year-old entering business, and there's a lot of things I didn't know. I went to school to study business because I couldn't find a major that I was particularly passionate about that was really specific. So I picked one of those big umbrella, you can do a lot with a business degree. Mm-hmm. And I spent time running small franchises for sort of my first post-college role. And I learned all about K through 12 education. And then I met a boy that got me to move to LA. And I interviewed at a company that felt big to me, and that was Cornerstone OnDemand. At the time, I think everybody would look at it as sort of a mature startup. It felt big to me because there were about 150 employees, and it seemed corporate, right? And I interviewed with the CEO and the chief operating officer and the one-man HR department, and it felt like a big deal. And I was almost... it worked out that I was almost ignorant about what a corporation was because I had no fear, right? I didn't go into my interviews worried that I wasn't going to meet a standard. I just went in and showed my brain and answered questions to a CEO like how many mattresses there are in the United States. And, in hindsight, realizing that, yeah, it's a weird question, realizing that, in their hiring practices, they were looking for potential. They were looking for, people that could do different roles at a company. And so as a business person, I was looking for marketing. I was really trying to stay away from sales, but the CEO of that company placed me on product management. And I learned product management is about translating human problems, needs into a language that instructs how, in the context of software, how you address that need with a feature function. So I'm translating to engineers and back. And when I figured that out, my career really took off. So it kind of started from a place of, this innate ability to problem solve and navigate, and turned into a 14-year career in product management. So through that journey, things I learned about myself, I I love solving problems, but I got to move up as a manager, and I learned about myself that I really enjoy teaching, educating, supporting, bringing up other product managers. That was sort of intrinsically rewarding, in addition to, all the things we learn about building products,
Yeah.
product strategy, product operations, the use of product analytics. What does data mean? How do you use it in all these different contexts? But I also learned about the reality of business. Business changes. It goes through inflection points. I like some of the inflection points. I do not like the inflection points that happen later in business, which really impact people and sort of beg a leadership question. And for my personal journey, I purposely stepped away from product leadership. I was a chief product officer at a small startup, in addition to my role at an enterprise software that served enterprise as the VP of product at Cornerstone. And after I made the ego choice and didn't like it, I made a personal choice to enter a growth zone, a learning zone. So I worked as an individual contributor in a sales position, selling something to my old self. And that sort of educated me on the function of sales, and also educated me on an area of product that I didn't feel strong at: data platforms, the technical stuff on the back end, which I did not learn with my business degree, right? And some of these sort of more complex areas of technology that business backgrounded product managers don't always feel confident at. So to summarize, the three pillars that inform the product canopy are certainly the domain expertise of product management, experiencing good and bad leadership in the context of business inflection points, going public, the painful realization that a leader knows how to do a good job when you're 250 million ARR, but they're not the right leader for, your journey to 1 billion in ARR, right? Like you viscerally experience the human impact and also recognize why businesses make some of those choices. So all of that leadership kind of moral principle compass and how to navigate that is my second reason why the product canopy exists. And my third reason why is kind of the shift of the way work is and the way society is. Building my own company allows me to live a principled way, apply my leadership principles,
Yeah.
do the product strategy, do the product execution that I'm good at, and on my terms in a contracted way with another company,
Yeah.
which feels like, as an employee, more control than I think a lot of employees feel like they have today when navigating their careers at companies in the environment we all exist in. That was a lot.
That well, no, but it's a really good story, and it's kind of neat how at each stage all of this experience that you got just sort of, you were able to sort of catalog, right, and to bring you to where you are now, which is, essentially being able to provide a full suite of services, really, that all fits in your wheelhouse, because you were able to gain all of that experience at all of those different stops, doing all of those different things at such a high level. So that's pretty cool. Kudos to you. Tell me about the kind of organizations that the product canopy that you work with. Who within these companies, are you engaging with primarily? Like what silos?
Yeah. The product canopy is in its first year of existence. And
Okay.
even as I build it and build partnerships and relationships with companies, I'm remaining flexible. And here's what I've noticed in the journey. So I started with, well, what makes sense is, I have built every product that serves the employee lifecycle: recruiting, onboarding, learning and development, engagement tools, everything that sits along that employee lifecycle. HRIS systems, like I've touched all of those, understood use cases, understood the businesses, how those businesses work that purchase those types of solutions. So it made sense that domain expertise would inform sort of the cohort of companies that I want to be introduced to. When I think about product management, a lesson I learned is it sits at the middle of a company. It is the hub of the wheel. And if it's not working in a way for the place a company is at, there are very specific pain points that impact other departments. So if product can't explain the value of the new feature, the new product, if they can't tie that to the story, the value statements, the sales team, the solution consultant team is hurt and hindered in their function to achieve their goals, quotas, really improve their ability to sell some product, let's say, right? I mean, it's true in B2C software as well. If you really don't connect with the problem you're trying to solve for your customers, and even if you do figure out the right solution, if you can't connect the dots and understanding, you're going to fail as well. So sales leaders are people I like to talk to because they can kind of communicate if they're seeing the red flags that signal something's wobbly with product. Similarly, CEOs, sort of the founders of a company, they come from all different places, right? All different backgrounds. Some are technical, some are sales minded, some are just really purpose driven in what they build. And they don't know what they don't know, but they sure can feel the pain, the anxiety, the concern, or it looks like lack of confidence in their roadmap, in their ability to compel investors to invest money in their company. There's all these observations that I might make, and a lot of times it's tied to a lack of clarity, definition, tied to business goals that aren't clearly mapped to what the product function is doing to contribute to those goals. So that's another really that's a person I talk to a lot. And then I also, it's an unproven hypothesis at the moment, but I think the investor group, the VCs of the world who have portfolios of companies that they're working with, a lot of times they'll see some of the red flags that signal, hey, product's getting a little bit wobbly. It's an important area to harden and solidify to achieve what are the most common goals, right? You want to go 0 to 1, you want to get around in investing, you want to have a particular growth rate. Like this function has to work well with the other functions, which are often, sales first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That what so this makes a lot of sense, and I can kind of see and understand how all those conversations would happen. I'm kind of curious some of the challenges that bring organizations to you. Is it primarily when you I used a really great term, and I've never really described product as being wobbly, but it creates this visual in my mind that that I guess I've even felt before. Um, is it primarily when their product is wobbly? Is it when they're growing too fast and they don't have the manpower to help manage some of these products, or their customer pipeline is growing too fast that they're getting feature requests for things that they don't know how to prioritize?
It can be all the above. And I kind of think of, I try to, when we are building something, time passes. When we look back and reflect, we often, I know I've had this experience, hindsight's 2020. You look back and you go, we were growing so fast. As a result, we layered on code, and now I got a bunch of tech debt. And now it's 5-7 years down the road, and maybe I'd like an exit. Maybe I'd like to be acquired. Now I got buyers looking at the back end of my platform, and it's a little messy, right? Being thoughtful upfront about laying a good product foundation can avoid that future mistake. That's one tiny example, right? Let's say the beginning of a journey for a company, and I focus on early stage and growth stage, not not like blank page, find a product for market fit, but we've got some market fit. We have momentum. Things are starting to feel a little wobbly. I don't know what I don't know. And in early stages, it might look like, hey, we know we need to expand our channels for revenue. And so we want to think differently about our strategy. And maybe we want to form partnerships, or maybe we want to sell to enterprise where we currently sell to SMB. As a leader of that organization, there may be a whole host of things you're kind of loosely aware you need to do, but you don't know how that should impact the roadmap. Classic example is, if you were to go up market and want to serve mid-market enterprise customers, there are security standards. You got to meet, GDPR, ISO, blah, blah, blah. I cannot commit to my memory all the acronyms for all of these certifications, but they materially impact the roadmap.
Yeah.
You need to speak intelligently about them. You got to make your sales team sound intelligent about them. So product often educates the front line, in addition to figures out what is the sequence we execute certain projects on in a roadmap. And then if I put a big umbrella, if I super simplified it, every roadmap needs to have 3 things on it. It needs to be fed by 3 things. One category is innovation, right? Like how will you not be obsolete in 3 years? Who's thinking about what comes next? So, our direction of our strategy kind of informs what are the innovative areas in the product that we need to add in further out on the horizon, but we need to figure out what that is now. So that's the innovation column, right? The next column is customer satisfaction. You can't just ignore your clients. If you tie it to business metrics, net retention, customer satisfaction, all those things are achieved by listening to your customers, and often that means representing on your roadmap, fixing, enhancing, taking their feedback and really making incremental adjustments that improve your customer's experience with your product. And then the third one is, I want to come up with a good name. I don't have the right name yet, but it's hardening the foundation. It's how you avoid long-term tech debt, because too many companies just layer on spaghetti code and worry about it later, and that slows you down later, right? And that's how new companies, new products built in new ways overtake the leaders in the space.
You brought up a couple of things about leadership, which is kind of interesting for me to talk about, and I think that when you're putting together roadmaps, it's really important to get all levels of the organization really aligned and on the same page, obviously. And that, it is a responsibility. You can call it a responsibility, you can call it a burden or whatever of leadership, and sort of kind of pivot into this conversation about people. I think that a lot of the challenges organizations face, not only in these three phases, actually, you talk about, but also within their organization, the people that they're working with, and making sure everybody's driven by the same aim, right? The same ultimate goal. How much of these challenges, are really just a function of leadership? How do you tell a leader that they may be part of what's holding their company back? Have you ever had to have these conversations, or have you ever been part of or seen these conversations happen? What was that like? Or,
Oh
if you
gosh,
have.
in my own, everybody should be doing some form of feedback. There are tools in the world that focus on feedback. There are the good habits leaders have, where feedback is part of how you communicate, and it's bi-directional.
Yeah.
When it's working well, it's bi-directional. So I failed and succeeded in giving feedback to the stakeholders of a product. So stakeholders of a product are the employees in the company that builds the product. They're your customers, right? They're an internal and external. And if we talk about the internal stakeholder of, let's say, your CEO, your CSO, right? Like titles and big businesses. But, even a smaller company, like you are operating as a crew, feels like a flatter organization, but nonetheless, the people you are working with, these are your stakeholders. So, failure and succeeding for people really comes down to communication. And in particular, product bears the weight. It can help a lot or hurt a lot if product leadership is not good at communication. And I actually just wrote an article about this on LinkedIn because I've thought about it for years, but finally arrived at, like, how do I explain the nature of effective communication in product? And so
I need to read this article, by the way. Don't forget to send it to me.
I'll tell you a bit about it. So I chose altitude as sort of the metaphor, right? So
Okay.
like you can relate to this, leading a company and a business. You have a vision, right? That's the 30,000 foot elevation. When you deliver a vision, what is your intention? You are trying to get your internal stakeholders, your crew of employees, everybody, every level in your organization that may exist. You were trying to motivate them. You're trying to get them behind the vision and the mission. So the purpose is motivation. If it's your external customers, right, like you want something succinct that really catches their attention and connects them to the problem that you're solving so they can self-identify as someone that needs your solution for solving. So that's 30,000 foot. That one's not that hard. Marketing can help people, leaders that are bad at it. It's a tagline, it's a few sentences. But when you get down to the next level of elevation, let's call it 20,000 feet, this is where you are defining strategy. So, what are the business goals of the company? Business goals don't always influence what product's doing, right? It could be something else. It could be like, we want partners. So we need an alliance team. And alliances are going to go get partnerships, right? But another business goal might uniquely be achieved by product management, its roadmap. Maybe it's like we want to sell something to our current customer base, and therefore we want to create the next product that makes sense because we want to upsell and increase the value of our existing customers, right? That would probably turn into a product goal. So business goal parsed into the different functions, goals that they execute, right? That's 20,000 foot. And what's challenging about it is the actual parsing of the business goals into the appropriate functional goals, like who's in charge of achieving this thing, and then breaking it down into initiatives. And that 20,000 foot part is so hard because you're making that transition to like destination to, and here's how we're going to get there. And then the leadership level right there that's defining how we're going to get there has to actually break it down into work that employees are motivated to do, that they're empowered to do, that they understand well enough that they can be creative and make it even better than, what it might have been if someone was just telling them what to do. Does that make sense, that 20,000 foot layer?
It makes perfect sense, and I see those challenges, all the time. And you're right. I mean, it's not easy. And then, like you said, translating those into initiatives or tactics, right? That accomplish those, whatever those bite-sized pieces are that you
Yeah.
broke them into. So
Yeah. So a lot of times the argument with the fights that happen internally, the debates, the things that are lack of clarity come from people not figuring out how to talk at the 20,000 foot level so that the leader can effectively give the goals to, the functional leaders and help the functional leaders and understand how the functional leaders are breaking it down into initiatives. So you either succeed or fail right at that elevation. And what it looks like when you fail, like if we go down a level in elevation, so now in the context of product, as a product leader, I've got a set of goals. I have a set of initiatives that inform what we're doing first, second, third on the roadmap. And the roadmap gets, whatever we build is released on a schedule. Now I'm setting expectations for work I want my team to do. But by extension, I am setting expectations for what marketing's talking about in a quarter, let's say. And I'm setting expectations because maybe I'm like touting what's coming for my customers. Am I delivering it on time? Is it going to be as awesome as I said it was going to be? Delivered on time? Like the stakes get really high to go right or to go wrong based on what you did at that 20,000 foot mark. And like everything below that, what goes wrong for employees when leaders don't handle it well up at that higher elevation? They don't trust the company is doing the right thing. They don't think their leaders know what they're talking about, right? They become complacent. And complacency comes after your employees try to tell you like these things are not connected well, right? If leadership doesn't listen, then you have employees go, well, you're not listening, you don't care what I say. I probably have mastery over the thing that I work on. And that's where ultimately a company can slow down because of poor leadership and the impact it can have on people.
I want to and I think that this whole section probably needs to be memed in some way, or clipped out and shared, because I see those kind of things happen so often, especially in small organizations where sometimes it's just build, 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 and there really isn't a lot of forethought put into why and what are those goals behind all of those things, and then communicating those things top down so everybody understands the why and is driven by the same thing, and gets how these things contribute to this, right, and then contribute to that, right, and then like you even said before, the alignment between those things and also marketing, right, innovation and marketing, those things have to work together, and the two things that ultimately drive value in business. And when they're not speaking the same language or talking about the same things, that's even another breakdown. So what happens when there's, kind of give me an example of things that happen when there's just not good communication? If there wasn't good communication or healthy team dynamics, what happens? What happens at the 10,000, 20,000, 30,000? Does the plane crash? I mean, talk to me about that.
Unfortunately, the plane. So I'll give a little bit of framing. I kind of picture a coin. One side of the coin is the business interest and the demands of the business placed on people that are, probably in most instances doing their best in their leadership role, right? On the other side of the coin is the employee's experience and what material outcomes that impact the business and the employee that happen when this altitude, this orientation and navigation, kind of the best leaders can traverse, right? The elevation levels. So let's start with the side of the coin that's about employees, because I've been an individual contributor, I've been an employee supporting a manager, thrice removed from a CEO. I have lived this experience. So there's a good amount of leeway that your bright, motivated, the best employees that you have, your high performers, if you will, because you often observe that they are problem solvers, they are flexible, adaptable, they start in a space of, I want to help. Let's work on this. Let's do OKRs, right? leader, come in the room. Like, can we talk through business goals? And then I'm trying to break this down in a tactical way. So I've got a statement that we can measure so that I can go do the work and not only meet your expectation, but exceed it because I'm a great employee and want to be acknowledged for my good work and I'm motivated, etc. Right? Um, when leadership doesn't show up for that, when they ignore the signs that the crew doesn't get where the captain is going and therefore can't parse out what they should do to grow faster or like figure out how to get there effectively faster, whatever. When time passes and they don't show up to close that gap of clarity, the motivated ones will stop trying to solve the problem. They will navigate themselves out of the business into a different role in the business. They're going to look for the manager, the leader that enables them to do their best work. And they have the skill set to do that, right? There is also a cohort of employees that I really respect. As a leader, I try to figure out where people are in their life because I respect if, hey, work is a transaction. You do good work. Your life isn't, your life's goals are not about advancing your career right now. They're about something else. Or maybe that's just not even your top 3 priority to move up to the next level. You're happy where you are. You get enough in your paycheck to meet your financial needs, and you're going to do your work, and then you're going to close your laptop or check it, clock out, whatever the scenario is. And I don't have a kinder word. I'm going to use the word complacency. I'm not trying to mean it in a negative way, but like they just roll with the punches, and they're going to be there until something happens, they get laid off or whatever. And they're like, yeah, I acknowledge this is kind of a fire. We've seen lots of memes where like the boat's on fire and the soldiers kind of just walking through things.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the 2 simplified classifications of employees. And the material outcome is, they build tools about this. Software companies are built on the notion of like talent marketplaces, right? Like, how do we keep our highly motivated employees engaged, and skill tools so that they can develop their skills so they can move to the next role. Like whole categories in HR tech are built around this. But at the end of the day, the material metric is retention of your top talent. So like, wow, you could really positively impact your retention of your top talent if you recognize the necessity of connecting the dots in a like well executed way between business goals, department goals, and then the initiatives that real people are going to work on. Flipping the coin. I feel like it's a long answer, but it's important on the other side. And if you refresh my memory, I want to answer the question like, what does it failure or success look like, right?
Yeah, I mean, I am kind of curious. Like, well, I think the question was primarily focused on kind of what does failure look like? When there is poor communication or lack of communication at those levels, one, multiple, all of those levels. What ultimately happens? What have you seen happen?
Yeah, like in the most visceral way. If you're holding a meeting in person or in Zoom, the leader of that meeting is finding it hard to get feedback in that moment because you're past the point of inviting feedback and getting feedback from your teams, right? You've already kind of broken trust. So that's kind of a visceral observation one should make when you're kind of past the point of being effective at aligning what people should be doing as it relates to the business goals. In the form of business metrics, it is your in regrettable turnover, right? Like that's the metric that you should be tracking. But all of those are lagging indicators. Don't wait till you see the lagging indicators. Like have high emotional intelligence, EQ, that is such an important skill at a leadership level. And often it's a result of ineffective communication and leaders not working with their subject matter experts, which tend to be the crew or the employees.
which kind of answers another question about, what can leaders be doing, who are missing, certain, I think, skill components, right? Maybe communication being one of them. I'm kind of curious, sort of, a multi-pronged topic, question,
Yeah.
issue, whatever. But, you know, great leaders don't necessarily have to be good at everything, right? Great leaders probably know that they're not great at everything and hopefully surround themselves with other people who are. Um, so I'm kind of curious, when you work with folks who maybe aren't great at communicating, aren't great communicators, but you do find them to be effective leaders, or maybe they want to improve their leadership, what are some strategies that maybe you give, or or ways that you're able to contribute to help in that area? What makes a good leader? How do you or what kind of tools would you recommend, or strategies you would suggest for those leaders to improve in the areas that they want to improve in? And
Yeah.
then, I mean, I'm kind of curious then, thinking forward, what are some competencies, that leaders should be focusing on, just in the future?
Yeah. Are you like take a drink of water? Um, this sit back, relax. I have a number of thoughts, and I want to spend time in with tactical tips.
Okay.
And I see this at the first line manager, right? Like I love when a high performing individual contributor invites the opportunity to become a manager. But you are not a good people manager just because you were good at your job.
It's true.
You have to find out if you're rewarded by helping others and take that. That's a responsibility. It is not for a higher paycheck. Like it's a thoughtful responsibility you should accept, right? But then you need to develop as manager. You don't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be kind of like nature versus nurture. It can be nurtured in someone. But let's kind of move up the hierarchy a bit to the leaders that affect maybe a larger group of employees. And the tips I'm going to give at any level of leadership, please hear these tips. Okay.
Tip
Okay. So
number
we'll
one.
start some. Tip number one: it matters how you run a meeting. If you schedule a meeting and you are an organizer, right? You sent the invitation. You are the leader of the meeting, and you need to run a good meeting. And that looks and sounds like you opening the meeting with what is the purpose of the meeting? What do you want to accomplish in this meeting? And at the end of the meeting, when you've arrived at like, okay, well, here's what we should do. Who's doing what? Who are the tasks? So it's structuring a meeting and then setting clear expectations out of the meeting. When you do that, everybody feels like the meeting was useful. And also they have clarity about what is expected after the meeting. I cannot tell you, like, I'm sure you've met with many CEOs. Maybe you do this. I don't know. But like your meetings are just people getting on a call talking. There's a lack of structure, there's a lack of purpose. And then the worst part is who's organizing what comes next after the meeting. And I'm telling you, tip to everybody, if you set the meeting, that's your responsibility. That one good habit is going to addresses poor communication, right? It ticks away at the risk of poor communication. Okay. The other one is the best leaders I've worked with, they show up with a work with approach. Okay. I've had this great leader in my old CEO of Cornerstone. We are whiteboarding designs on a wall together. In another mentor, managers I've admired from a distance, sales leaders, they are working with their sales team to understand their prospective customer, right? And in that working with behavior, the employee is receiving the messages that they are learning your logic, the leader's logic. Why and how do you look at a company when you're strategizing how you're going to sell to them? That is such deep, rich learning that is that teaching moment for the employee is so much more valuable, right? And rewarding for them, and will be carried with them into the future. And leaders, they get busy and they don't really take the time. They often delegate maybe when they shouldn't, or they delegate the wrong thing, but it's not something you pass down or give a responsibility to someone else until you've worked with them in a way that they had an opportunity to learn, that you taught your thinking behind how an approach you have. The simple example being like, how do you prep for a prospective customer? So they teach and explain. I had a great CEO, one of the best CEOs I work with. His name's Adam Miller at Cornerstone OnDemand. He's doing a lot of philanthropy work now, and has other businesses that he started up. But he would host sessions at training days, and I learned about the Rule of 40 from him. In 2008, he spent 90 minutes on stage teaching, a company that had an average age of maybe 32, like a young population, freaking out about the market crash in 2008. And he spent 90 minutes on stage educating us on what happened. He was teaching us about real estate and financing of homes and why that all went wrong, and how that was impacting the economy in general. Like, that is education. Learned so much. And that company, for a period of time, their employee tenure, there's still people there, but it averaged like 8 years. That's unheard of.
That's
against your peers in markets, like 2-4 years in role. And there are people that stayed there so long, not because of their paycheck. Frankly, you could have paid more competitively, but they were there for the learning that they were gaining in that experience there. Okay, the next one. I'm just going to start saying this more often. I think it's, when we look at the success of a business, think about the formulas like EBITDA, right? Or like return on investment. How do you calculate that, right? Like, there's the formulas. When you break down the variables, it's all just financial metrics and the money being spent. And we measure the success of a company, if it's going to be invested in, right, by those metrics. But then, we have entire software built and HR departments that are sending messages about great work experiences, right? Let's measure the experience employees are having. So those messages tell us the employee experience is important. So again, we're kind of back to that coin scenario.
Yeah.
If I could reinvent how we assess business performance, I would change the formula. I would merge the financial indicators and improve the weight we apply, incorporate and then weight more the metrics that communicate a business that is good for its people. I have a quote on my wall. How you take care of employees is a direct correlation to your customers' experience with your brand and product, right?
100%.
Everybody agrees with that. But if we check the math, we actually don't measure for that, right? Like, you get a badge and award if people survey your company and say it's a great place to work, right? Or like, we look at things like retention rate, or we look at things like employee sentiment, commitment, engagement. But those are not variables that investors, the economy, like people that classify high-performing companies, give any weight to. And I think that's wrong. Why? Because we're kind of all on this, like, we're all humans, and we're on this journey for about 80-ish years together. And we spend a lot of time at work. And it feels like there's a lot of people giving a good attempt at it, but it doesn't feel balanced at the end of the day when we define what a successful company is. And I guess I'd argue that we should change the definition of success to acknowledge the humans, customers, and employees. And they should be part of the definition of a successful company.
Well, kind of continuing to look ahead then, tell me about predictions then on what the future of work is going to look like. We already know how we should redefine what success looks like and what investable companies, how we might want to measure them. But what do you think leaders need to prep for in the coming 5 or 10 years?
Mm. Well, I I sort of have my aspirational, emotional and not emotional. I don't know. Like I also want to say woo woo, but I kind of have the like, what is the right thing to do, and at the same time acknowledge the
Yeah.
right thing to do isn't always the, um, I don't know, the it's not the reality, because history tells us you don't always make decisions based on just what's the right thing to do. What do I wish I could do? But let's start there. Um, I think leaders need to think more broadly about their what leadership is, and leading a business specifically, should give more. Your responsibility is not just to shareholders, or you need to think of your employees as shareholders. I think all employees should. So, what might that look like? I love companies that have employees as shareholders, that they share some ownership in the company,
Yeah.
um, because then they're positively affected by the financial realities of a company, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that with AI impacting everything, like everybody's talking about that, I find it interesting and laughable that the messages we receive are marketing messages might be like, oh, we need to put human in front of the word AI, because everything up until this point we've said it's going to add efficiency. Well, let's point out that it's going to add 30%, 40% efficiency impact on the employee's role. But then when they measure the return on investment, the formula is full-time employee. How many full-time employees can you reduce? So when you see 30% productivity, like you're going to lose for a business, from a business decision perspective, you could cut a third of an employee of the population, have the same amount of productivity, and more returns for shareholders, right? Like we can see that math. So I would challenge leaders to really kind of zoom out and reflect on what is your purpose in running a business. The purpose needs to be broader than just shareholder return. It's important, yes, but because it is the way we take care of our families, it is the way we put a roof over our heads, it is the way we transact and exchange goods and value. Like it's a little bit more care and priority should be placed on that larger equation. Does that make sense?
I mean, I fully align with that. I think ever since the early 80s or late 70s, when shareholder supremacy took over, it really changed how employers and employees really interacted with one another. Kind of, I mean, I think that was really kind of the start of the degradation of, a lot of the employee experience, I think. So,
So is it going to happen? I'm a skeptic. So what's going to happen? So how will employees adapt? So now let's go to the other side of the coin.
yeah.
I think we've seen, a lot of companies in the HR tech space talk about how work is changing. That sounds like a few things. There's been a transformation in work where gig work is more common.
Mhm.
There's now established models for gig work. AI tools are making people more efficient and removing things that were hard skills people would have to learn to accomplish. I'm not an engineer, but now I can build an app all by myself. I'm not a product marketing master, but now ChatGPT can kind of get me a little bit closer to really crafting a message, right? So um, the tools the tools that are coming on the market today, the way companies are modeling their business and sort of breaking the old contract between employer and employee, these things I think are motivating shifts in how we work. So I think we see more contract work. For me, I'm doing that. It gives me a sense of control, right? I don't
Yeah.
have to, I'm not investing and hoping a company will invest in my career trajectory. I'm kind of taking control by being an independent person and starting my own company. I think we'll see a shift in that model of W-2 full-time employees to maybe something that's more contract-based, because it gives the employee control and line of sight of the duration.
Yeah.
If we kind of look at like how even healthcare is transforming, like all these things are connected, right? If you're not, healthcare was provided by your employer, that's kind of feels a little less secure. But like if I have to take control over it, like that again is another example of being an independent contractor. Otherwise, employees kind of, I aimed at doing this when I was interviewing for other product leaderships. I kept saying, what am I looking for in a company? And the common things like a certain amount of pay, a reasonable, like other than pay, I can't even say if like I would qualify in or out vacation policies or like perks like, I don't know, pet insurance, or like if you work in an office, they've got paddleball and snacks, like some of the old things that added to the experience of work. But when I took inventory of why would I work for someone, right? Yes, it's pay. But if I can meet that criteria, my next qualification is who am I working with? And do they have a set of leadership principles and moral principles that I can get behind? Because I want to row hard with my crew and for my captain.
I love that last part, especially. So we only have like a minute or two left, and I want to ask you, because I love this question. I feel like you'll definitely have a lot to add here. If you have one piece of advice, if a leader's coming to you really with one piece of advice on how to really get it right with their team, with their vision, with the alignment, with their product, you're on an elevator up to the top floor before you see that door open and they walk right out, of the elevator car. What do you tell them?
Yeah, I'm going to go real tactical with this, and it ties back to that altitude of communication that's relevant beyond product. And it's the tip. Write it down. Like write down your vision to strategy so that your crew understands your thinking. Because when you take the time to express, written format is the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
When you take the time to do that, you will multiply your ability to execute it, because now you've got more brains that fully understand it and are empowered to row for that mission, row for, be the captain. I've thrown in a lot of metaphors today.
That's okay. But I think that that's really good advice. I mean, and I think that that makes a lot of sense, and it kind of perfectly sums up a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. Thank you, Summer. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you taking all the time to chat with me. This was great.
Oh, well, thank you for letting me vent. Felt therapeutic.
For all of you who are watching or listening to this episode, thanks for tuning in to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Be sure to check us out at mustardhub.com to see how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. And sign up to get started with Mustard Hub for free while you're there. Until next time, thank you.